Everyone loves a snack. It's in our nature, but do it in a healthy way and get all natural healthy snacks from NatureBox. With snacks like blueberry nom noms, strawberry Greek yogurt pretzels, and country ranch sunflower kernels for those sunflower seed addicts, FBIA podcast listeners will get a free month and snack when they go to FBIApodcast.com website and click the NatureBox banner at the bottom of the page.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Football is America with Ron and Kyle. I'm Ron.
And I am Kyle, and today we are joined by Mickey Mentzer, editor from CincyJungle.com, which is a fantastic part of the SB Nation community, obviously representing the Cincinnati Bengals. If you are a Bengals fan, this is where you need to be going for your Bengals news, and a very fun community. Get in the comments. Mickey, thanks a lot for joining us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
For a lot of the fans, this is their first chance to hear your voice and get to know a little bit about you. So I'd like to start by asking questions about you as opposed to the team. And let's just jump right into that and let me know, how long have you been a fan of the team?
Since I can remember, really. I don't remember the day I became a Bengals fan, but I know growing up in Columbus, kind of stuck in the middle between Cincinnati and Cleveland, you kind of had to pick your alliance. So most of my family was Browns fans. So I think probably just to be, a little defiant, I went with the Bengals. Pretty good choice, I think.
Well, just based on talking to a lot of the people that we talked to, the Browns are kind of that laughing stock, and the Bengals is at least that, well, they're doing some things right. It's fine. Yeah, the Browns are there. Yeah.
Yeah, we love to make fun of those guys.
Well, it's easy.
They write the script for you.
Yeah, I mean, when you saw Johnny Manziel drafted, you had to be laughing, right?
Well, it was the funniest part was how some people actually bought in and thought that was a great pick.
It just keeps on going.
Yes.
So what is it that drove you to be a professional and get in and take on the responsibilities of a website?
So I guess you could say I became a super fan. Me and a group of guys pitched in, bought a tailgate bus, painted it orange and black, season ticket holders, going to every game. And we'd be driving back from the games, and, one of the local radio stations would have the call-in show, and you would hear just the dumbest comments from people calling in. And, the Bengals suffered a pretty long stretch of being just an absolutely terrible team. And these people were just so moronic that I was like, man, we got to get our voice out there. So we started a website called Who Dey Fans. For the first year, had about 8 hits a day. It was really, the guys in my office, I think, were the ones that read it. And then it started blowing up, and long story short, we caught side of SB Nation, teamed up with Cincy Jungle, and the rest is history. So I've been writing over there for a few years. We do a podcast, so it's a pretty good time.
No, I think you're probably the first person we've talked to then who has just said, nope, can't handle what everybody else is doing, my own page. And that's definitely a level of commitment. Most people just start as a member of the SB Nation community. You just jumped right into, I'm in charge of this, I know what I'm doing. And I definitely respect the viewpoint of people calling in on the radio just have this backwards way of looking at football, and you got to correct them. Now let me ask you, what is your strongest memory of the team, good or bad?
That's a tough one. My strongest memory, I'm going to go when someone asks me the first thing that comes to mind is probably 2005, Carson Palmer's knee and Chris Henry's leg injuries in the playoffs, when I think that was probably the Bengals' best chance so far in the last 20 years to make a run in the playoffs, and on one play it was destroyed. So I would say that that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
That's kind of a downer, but yeah,
it was an extreme downer. But we had just the way the game went, that we held the Steelers to 3 and out. They false started twice. The crowd was so loud. Carson Palmer connects with Chris Henry on a 66-yard pass. I mean, everything looked like it was going the Bengals' way, and instantly the air was let out of the stadium with one tackle.
So were you upset that that's not what caused the whole don't hit a quarterback low, and just a couple of years later, Tom Brady going down is what that's now we can't hit quarterbacks low after watching kind of what happened to Carson Palmer in that game? Because I watched that game live. I remember when it happened, and I remember the outrage that came from it because it just looked so dirty.
It did, but like my wife is a Kansas City Chiefs fan, but we root for each other's teams, kind of behind the scenes. And I talked to her on the phone because she had, she gets the better view from the TV, all the replays and stuff. And she says, I don't think it was dirty. He looks so upset, because Von Oelhoffen stood up, put his hands on his head. The rage in the stadium, you just assumed it was dirty, but because it was the Steelers, but it wasn't. So I understand that football's a contact sport, and when sometimes injuries are going to happen and it stinks, and it was a bad break, but yeah, I don't really think it was dirty. I understand the rule now, and they made the rule because of Tom Brady, I think, but yeah, I don't hold any grudges or anything like that. I think that's the nature of the game.
So let's get into a little bit of what happened last year, and the season was at the least a little up and down for the Bengals. Kyle is a Colts fan.
All right.
So be prepared for a little bit of banter from his direction with the shutout and everything that happened. He doesn't get to brag much about anything, so in this life, we let him have this one thing. So, but lots of injury issues last year. Dalton still does not seem to be living up to the expectations that everyone has for him, and that first round hump keeps tripping them up once again. And I think this was the fourth straight one and done. But looking back on 2014, can you tell us if you thought that the season was a success as a whole, and what those smaller successes were, if any?
I guess any season you make it to the postseason is a kind of successful season. I think every year like you said, the past 4 years the Bengals have made the first round of the playoffs, and every year the story's been a little different. This year, the injuries for the playoff game were ridiculous. Like we had our best defensive player, our best offensive player out, plus a handful of other key players just not playing in the game. So, that for a team to get over the mental hump of winning in the first round of the playoffs, they probably needed all their weapons to have a chance in that game. Ending that way is a disappointment. That being said, you talk about some of the bright spots from the season. I would argue the brightest spot that the Bengals got from last season was the emergence of the running back Jeremy Hill, who also got hurt in that playoff game. But he turned out to, at times he put the team on his back. I would say none bigger than when they played the Broncos. The Bengals give up a touchdown and Jeremy Hill answers with an 85-yard run. He put up incredible numbers and wasn't even the starter for half the season. So I would say he's one of our biggest bright spots from last season. So in that aspect, the emergence of the running game is success, and it gives you something to look forward to this year, along with some additions that we've had in the offseason. So I would, if it was a thumbs up, thumbs down type thing, I'd say thumbs up.
One thing I definitely was confused about with the season was, as you said, you make the playoffs. That's a measure of success, but people were still generally down on the team. And it just seems as though there's this negative perception around the team that was just permeating the whole season, despite the success. You had people with fans of a team that has like 5-6 wins, and they're feeling like they can talk smack on the Bengals. And I'm like, that's a playoff team. It doesn't. I don't understand that.
It's pretty simple, really. I'm so close to I see every move, every play, right? So I understand the type of team the Bengals are. For most of the NFL fan base, they see the Bengals when they're in prime time, when they're in the playoffs, and they seem to choke in all those games. Other than the Denver game last year, you got to see the Bengals choke against Cleveland, choke against Indy, just epic failures. So, when a 3-win team sees how bad the Bengals play on the one time they get to see them. Yeah, I understand them thinking that the Bengals are crap, and until the Bengals perform consistently, or win in the playoffs, that's the burden they have to carry.
I do suppose it is all relative. I have people giving me grief when I wear my Colts gear, like, you got taken out by the Patriots. I'm like, we made the AFC Championship game.
Right.
Where was your team? Back at home? Yeah, you don't get to. You know how fans are. Anyway,
Yes.
So 4 years in the postseason, 4 years one and done, and a lot of times it definitely was not the expectation. I've got to assume that the head coach and the GM, their seat's getting a little hotter. Now, I mean, Marvin Lewis is the head coach. There's obviously a lot easier chance for him to be on the hot seat than the GM, because that is also the owner.
True.
So it's kind of hard to, have him fire himself. Marvin Lewis, is this a make or break year for him?
It seems like the Bengals are painting that picture. He usually gets a contract extension around this time, and the Bengals have come out and said they're not doing that this year, so this would be his last year under contract as a coach for Cincinnati. But in the same breath, it's tough. It would be tough to fire a coach that has taken a team that has been historically terrible over the last 20 years to the playoffs 5 of the last 6 years. Yeah, they haven't won, but I mean, there's a ton of teams that you could present that scenario like you'll lose the first game in the playoffs, but you'll make it every year, and they would jump on that. I mean, I'm sure Cleveland would be one of those teams that would, love to have an extra game one season. So it's tough to say that he would get fired, but there is definitely frustration. They definitely, need to take that next step for the fans, for probably the front office. It's tough without a GM because the burden falls on Marvin Lewis. So he's bringing in a ton of talent. He drafts very well, makes smart free agency moves. But every year the pressure gets bigger. So if they do the same thing this year, I would venture to say he wouldn't be fired, but the scrutiny would be turned way up.
And what's the general feeling on Mike Brown acting as GM? Because when we look at his tenure, it is not great. It gets to the point where we're like, wow, people rip on Jerry Jones and Al Davis, but compared to this guy and his track record.
Sure, in the 90s and 2000s, the Bengals were historically bad. I mean, 3-win seasons, 4-win seasons were the norm, and it seemed like Mike Brown was making all those decisions. I would argue since Marvin Lewis came on, he slowly pulled some of that power out. And there's a guy in the organization named Duke Tobin. He kind of does some of the GM, tasks without holding that title. So what I think's happened is some of that decision making around player personnel and things like that have been pulled from Mike Brown, which is why we see the team improving. So I think Mike Brown's best moves lately have been allowing other people to make decisions for him, because you can't argue he's a terrible GM. He's proven it, without question. I think he makes very good financial decisions. He's fiscally responsible. The team is his only business. It's very profitable. But as far as, on the field, him giving up control is the best thing that's happening for this team.
And do you see that maintaining that course of action if Marvin Lewis is to leave? Will we see a scenario in which Mike Brown continues to let other people make the football decisions, or is he going to start hoarding power again?
You nailed it. I mean, that's one of the worries around getting rid of Marvin. Would he trust, someone they just bring in to make those kind of decisions? And we don't know, but as a Bengals, as a collective, we're nervous that he would go back and start signing free agents for way too much that never play and things like that. So that's another reason why people, are content with Marvin Lewis.
Kyle was making a comparison to Jerry Jones and Al Davis, and the things that kind of are glaring to me when it came to Mike Brown, and I guess the reason I'm so interested in it is because I just didn't realize until more recently the way he works and the decisions he's made and how the team has been formed under his watch and tutelage, I guess is the best way to put it. And the lack of on-field success they've had just up until recently. I mean, 5 winning seasons out of 23, and that's not great. You have a lot of the 9 straight loss seasons. You have a lot of really terrible seasons, and I know that, we're talking Marvin Lewis has really brought us back from that. Can you kind of look back and say, what was the worst decision he made and what was the best decision he made as the owner/GM?
Oh, so the worst decision he made, I'm going to throw out a couple of wide receivers. He signed Antonio Bryant, for $7 million. The guy never played, and he brought in Terrell Owens to make the Bengals even more of a sideshow than they already were. I would say those were 2 pretty terrible signings in a long group. I mean, he made some terrible quarterback decisions, replaced guys that were fine, like Esiason. But the best decisions, I would say, on the field would be hiring Marvin Lewis. I mean, that's got to be. It kind of changed the culture of the organization. And also off the field, when he needed a stadium built, he fleeced the city. I mean, and that sounds terrible, but as a businessman, you want the best deal you can. And a team that was so bad getting such a sweet stadium deal from the county they live in, voted on by the people that would eventually complain about it. That's a pretty good deal. And, it's one of the few stadiums that doesn't have a sponsored name. And he can afford to do that because of the deal he got. So, I mean, that from the Bengals organization standpoint, that was a pretty smart move, great decision, I think.
One last question I have when it comes to one of his decisions is, I want your take on the Carson Palmer situation and how all of that kind of unfolded and when everything kind of ended. And I know that we're reaching back a little far here, but obviously he has an injury issue. He's had him for a long time now. Has him in Arizona, but when he does play, he plays very well. And his exit seemed to be more his decision than it was the Bengals for the most part. So what was your guys' feeling on that? You've been writing for the Bengals or about the Bengals for a while now. So what was the fan perception then, and what is it now?
That's a great question. So the Carson Palmer situation, Carson Palmer had the key to the city. Then he hurt his knee, rehabbed it in, just such an aggressive time frame, came back, played pretty well, but never really returned to what he was. And we debated a ton. Did changes in the line affect him? Was it the receivers? But the magic was kind of gone. So when he decided he was going to throw his tantrum and say, trade me or I'll sit, when you're a fan of maybe not the Bengals and you're seeing something like that, or a fan, just a smart person in general, sometimes you want the owner to call the bluff. Sometimes you want the organization to stick up for it. And the Bengals did that. They said, fine, sit, And
we're seeing that like right now with Adrian Peterson. We're starting to see something similar.
Like you can't cater to the stuff like that. And I don't fault Carson. Genuinely thought the Bengals weren't going to improve. He wanted to go to a winning organization. So I don't really fault anyone in that, but I love the stance that the Bengals took, and it turned out to be great. They ended up fleecing, the Raiders, Hugh Jackson's for two high picks, and then getting that guy back as the offensive coordinator, a season later. And, Carson Palmer really did nothing for the Raiders. He's since moved on,
and it's funny that they traded him to the Raiders because you're saying that, he wanted to leave. He didn't think the Bengals were going to be able to do anything, and he wanted to go to a winning organization, and they traded him to the Raiders. I mean, it's just, all right, fine. You don't want to play for us? We're going to send you to the worst team in the NFL right now. Here you go.
Right. And for just a bag of gold, and it couldn't have worked out better for the Bengals. I won't say that Andy Dalton is the caliber quarterback that Carson Palmer is, but the Bengals have enjoyed success, and some of it is due to the high picks they got from the Raiders, and getting Hugh Jackson back. So it worked out extremely well for the organization. And I don't know that there's some people that hated Carson Palmer at the time, and I think a lot of that's faded. as you kind of see a guy struggle, you lose some of that hatred towards him. But yeah, the situation was terrible at the time, but it ended up turning out pretty good.
And it's definitely,
All right,
I just want to chime in there. When Ron's saying stuff like we're only seeing 5 winning seasons in the past 20 something years, and I'm guessing all of those have come under Marvin Lewis. Yeah, I now definitely get your perspective of how much more of a just scare it is to think about losing this guy, because he is the representation of success right now. That has got to be a terrifying thing to a much greater extent than I had even imagined.
Right. And the Bengals fans are, they constantly wait for that other shoe to drop. And, the unknown is a little scarier than the known, because we've had such a terrible past.
We're talking Carson Palmer, and that's in the past. So let's get into some of the future stuff here. We're going to get into the concerns for next season, and the Bengals are not without their own concerns. We have a lot of concerns for a lot of NFL teams, but we want to kind of go over the more glaring concerns and lay them out here for you, okay? One thing that is not necessarily a concern, but just weird to me, is that the cap is at a comfortable $21 million. Lots of personnel moves around the league, but the Bengals were relatively quiet. So why is it that the Bengals seem to be so uninvolved in free agency this year?
The Bengals are usually not involved in free agency, and that's a point of contention with fans. And there's kind of, people saying on either side of the line. I'm of the camp that you don't win the Super Bowl in free agency. It's very rare that you can, affect your team so much that it's going to make a huge difference. I think drafting well does much better for your team. So I think that's why the Bengals have enjoyed their success. The cap thing is another debatable point for the Bengals. The Bengals are one of the teams that are not creative with their cap money. They don't do these huge deals and shuffle money to kind of make things work. They are, straight by the book. So, where one team will be, you hear it all the time, they're getting close to the cap, and then they sign some player for $7 million a year. How do they do that? And it's all how you structure deals or restructure. The Bengals don't do any of that. They generally honor their deals. They, keep some cash in their wallet, and they play it pretty safe. But I think this free agency is different. The Bengals have made, not significant on the NFL level, but significant for the team. They signed a free agent guard that he was on the team. They re-signed, but keeping continuity on the line is huge, especially when you have success. And I think every year that you keep a line together, they get a little better. But then they also bring back Michael Johnson, which is another one of those deals that the Bengals make, kind of like that Carson Palmer deal that works out great. So they lose a strong pass rusher, Michael Johnson, last season in free agency to Tampa Bay, who then does nothing with them. They sign him back this year for a decent deal, plus they get the 3rd round compensatory pick for losing him last year. So they get their guy back and a 3rd round pick. And then they also signed Pat Sims, who had success with the team. So the Bengals in this free agency have definitely made huge improvements on their defensive line. They just haven't been the flashy moves. And I think that's kind of, I don't know if it's Mike Brown or Marvin Lewis, as we talked about before, but that's kind of, their game plan. Don't overpay for players. Just make your team a little bit stronger.
And you actually just hit on everything I was about to talk about, which is all the free agent signings. First one that you didn't cover was the AJ Hawk signing. And this was one that I was talking to Kyle about, and I said, hey, this is actually a guy that could easily make a difference. He plays in a 3-4 in Green Bay. He comes over, he's experienced, and he's had his better years more recently than his first few years. I mean, he was almost a bust. I mean, he was borderline right at the edge to being a draft bust, and ended up kind of picking it up over those last few years. A lot of people will argue that Clay Matthews is the reason that he got better. What is your kind of take on him? What do you think? What kind of role will he have? Is he more of just a depth player? Is he a guy to help the young guys? Because it's obvious at this point, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but they're probably going to be going after some linebacker stuff in the draft. What is his role going to be?
Yeah, that was an interesting signing, and I love it for the fact that AJ is a native from the area, grew up a Bengals fan. I always think it's cool when a guy gets to play for their team. Beyond that, I was a little nervous because the Bengals have an outstanding linebacker in Vontaze Burfict, but he got hurt at the end of last season, and I'm still questioning how he's going to return, if he's going to return, how bad that injury is. So when they bring in a veteran like Hawk, it kind of makes you wonder, is there more to that injury? You know, he had head injuries, knee. He just didn't seem right last year. So that makes me nervous in that aspect. Is there more behind the scenes with Vontaze Burfict? But I think he's a depth player, and the Bengals like the rotation type defenses where you can keep guys fresh. And having Hawk in there, a guy with a ton of experience, we would have loved to have him at the end of last season when our linebacker core was decimated with injuries. So I think they brought him in as another quality, solid guy you can plug in at the linebacker position. So I'm pretty happy with the move.
Now, one last thing when it comes to signings, and this is not necessarily about the signing, but more about the impact of the person that he is. We have to talk a little bit about the Devon Still stuff. The impact that he's had on the team, that his daughter's had on the team. What has he kind of done to shape the perception of the Bengals? The Bengals went from being a team that was known as not being loyal or always being loyal to the wrong people, not really retaining their players, never giving big money, never showing that we're going to sign somebody just on principle. They're not known for that kind of thing. So bringing back Devon Still, granted, he's not exactly a top tier caliber player, but just the fact that he's come back and what he has meant and his daughter has meant to the team. What is your take on that entire story?
It's pretty incredible. And I think the Devon Still story was a win for the NFL. You think about what the NFL was doing from the PR side recently. You got Hernandez, you got Ray Rice, you have all these, Adrian Peterson, all these terrible things happening, and then you have this, little girl that's fighting cancer. Her father plays for the Bengals, cuss player, not doing enough to stay on the team. Probably without the cancer situation would have been cut. So the Bengals keep him on the practice squad, knowing that he'd be covered with the insurance, but allowed him the freedom to be able to, be there for his daughter. The league grabbed it, the Bengals grabbed it, followed the story. It was a feel good thing, the fans. And then the guy had an opportunity to play. They promoted him at towards the end of last season. He had the opportunity to play. Well, then he's a free agent. So what happens? The Bengals offered him a deal pretty quick, but he sat on it because he wasn't sure the outcome with his daughter. And just to tell you, like, the type of guy he is, he would have not played if her situation was worse. He would have walked away from the money, all that, which is pretty respectable. But then they get incredible news that she's in full remission. He signs his deal. And I'm kind of excited to see what happens with him this year. He's got the skill to play the position, and now that he has the opportunity to be focused, you could see some improvement. And it's just a feel-good story. I mean, I don't know anyone. You saw what the Saints did. They bought 100 of his jerseys. They kind of trickled throughout the NFL, and it was a win for the positive side of the league when all that negative stuff was going on. So it was pretty important last year, and it's definitely a storyline we still follow.
And I'm guessing that it was actually a fairly large deal within the community. Like you said, a lot of people only see the Bengals in prime time. So I saw glimpses of this, but it wasn't a center stage kind of story because it wasn't, football in itself. It was something related to football, but not direct. So I guess what I'm getting at is, what was the true nature of this? Like, how big did it get within the community? Because I'm only looking at it from a distance. I have no idea. And, you definitely sound as though it was a very positive and uplifting feel good story all year that the team was showing this love and support. I just don't know. A lot of times in the NFL, it's like, yeah, we're paying lip service. This one seems a little more genuine, though. It
does. And it was pretty, you guys mentioned when you started with this topic about some of the perceptions of Mike Brown being a cheapskate. always trying to save the money. And it seemed like he did the right thing for this player. So people jumped on board. And on the other side, following this little girl story, the Cincinnati community, the Bengals fans collectively, every fundraiser, we were all over. It was just a feel good thing, and we love to follow it. So yeah, in our world, in our bubble, it was pretty big, and it changed the perception of the organization for some. Some people just hold on to their beliefs, but it was just a good thing. And yeah, it's not lip service. It wasn't just a PR move. It was just the team did the right thing, which was pretty cool.
I'm definitely glad we got a chance to talk with you about it, because I did not know that he was essentially a practice squad guy that they kind of kept around just to let him hang on to that great insurance. And that's definitely an NFL team putting, doing the right thing ahead of a business move. And the fact that it got beautiful results is, all the better. So now that we've talked about something positive, we got to shift gears jarringly and talk about something negative, which is the play of quarterback Andy Dalton.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Awkward. But anyway, now in his rookie year, he looked pretty good, definitely had the potential to be a franchise guy. And for a while there, he was playing very well. Of course, he's going to have some wrinkles to iron out. Every quarterback does. But there was this belief that he could come in and be the guy that is needed to be a leader and, the face of the franchise and just an all-around asset. I remember Bill Polian saying that if he had drafted Andy Dalton for the Colts and let Andy Dalton play that 1-2-14 year, there would have been way more wins, and there would have, and that we'd still see Peyton Manning in Indy and some semblance thereof. Andy Dalton had that potential, and it is not being realized now. What is the issue with him right now? I mean, that's a pretty broad question, but what is, I guess, the biggest problem that you see with him? Is it mental? Is it mechanics? Is it the scheme? Is it the talent around him? I mean, why is he not reaching his potential right now?
Man, this debate rages on. I mean, I could throw up a post on Cincy Jungle right now that just says, hey, let's talk about Andy Dalton. And we would, by the end of the weekend, we would have 600 comments on it.
Will you do that?
You have, I could. I mean,
yeah.
we're kind of boycotting the Andy Dalton topic for now, just because it's such a lightning rod, and it's political. People just they take their side and they'll battle it. So let's talk about the good of Andy Dalton. Here's a guy that every year, every season he's been in the NFL, he's taken his team to the playoffs. That's not a lot of guys can say that. But he makes huge mistakes. So, to answer your last question, is it mechanical or mental? It's definitely mental. The guy has a quick release. He doesn't have the huge arm to throw the ball 66 yards down the field, but that's not necessary in the NFL. You're going to win more games being efficient and doing what you can do. Part of my argument, and I've been labeled the Dalton lover, because that's what you get labeled if you don't blame every fault of the Bengals on one player. Like, we're kind of irrational like that. So,
just you? No other teams like that at all?
No, I'm sure every other team is perfectly sane and put together.
Yeah, all the fans are calm and collected and very reasonable.
Yeah, that's usually the impression I get. So,
and no team has fans that only show up when the team is winning and then leave as soon as they're good, right? 49ers, right?
Man, we could throw jabs at all the teams, but for the Dalton thing, I really think the scariest part of Dalton is we've seen his best. People expect it after his first season. They look past the mistakes, because maybe the first two seasons, because he's young, he's a rookie. In his second year, he's going to get better. He's going to not make those throws. He's not going to make those reads, but he hasn't. He's kind of continued. So I say, look, we know what we have. We have a serviceable / good quarterback. Now you need to you either need to, cut the line, let him loose, start over, or you need to surround him with the type of players that's going to allow him to do what he can do. And I don't know that the Bengals have done that or consistently do that. Take, for example, we have Tyler Eifert, Jermaine Gresham, two incredibly talented tight ends catching the ball, yet we never run them up the seam. We never, give them the opportunity to make big tight end moves. We ask Andy Dalton to throw low percentage passes rather than, complete his high percentage passes and just move the ball. So I think that some of the fault lies on the coaching staff, because you can't expect a guy to be what he's not. And the fans that get so upset expect Andy Dalton to turn into a Luck or a Manning or whatever. He's not going to be that guy. So you have to know what his limitations are and put the best thing around him. Last season, the emergence of the running game allowed Andy Dalton to take a back seat to that part of the offense, which was huge. And I think as we add weapons, guys stay healthy. If you put him in a position where here's your reads, these are all throws that you're very accurate. He's a pretty accurate passer on a lot of routes. He's just not going to gunsling the ball down the field. If the Bengals do that, you're going to win with Andy Dalton. So you don't allow the guy to make those huge mistakes that he seems to make on national TV, which is why he gets that reputation, and he deserves it. But it's interesting. You'll find Bengals fans on both sides arguing for and against it, and it kind of is like that Marvin Lewis debate where, yeah, but before Andy Dalton, we never made the playoffs. So now, are we okay with just making it to the first round of the playoffs every year? So I don't know. I think the Bengals can hide his weaknesses better than they do.
So I am a Bears fan. Obviously, Jay Cutler is a very strong point of contention with Bears fans right now. Listening to you talk about Andy Dalton and about how he's not going to be the guy that everybody expects him to be, and that they need to surround him with the type of players that are going to make him successful. They need to give him the opportunity to make the plays that he is best at, and that there is a lot of hope for him, and that this is a lot of the stuff I was hearing about 3 years ago with Jay Cutler. And granted, Andy Dalton's a little bit younger. He's not a rocket arm quarterback, right. But when you look at his mistakes, very comparable.
Yes.
Very comparable. His mental mistakes that he makes, the throwing off the back foot, the throwing across the body on the run, the trying to go deep in a tight window against good pass defenses, the checking down when he has guys wide open because he's just not paying attention. Those kind of mental mistakes are what I watch every single week on a Chicago football field. So at what point are the fans going to say, even the apologists going to say, all right, this can't happen anymore? Because I was a Jay Cutler apologist, and now I want nothing more than to burn his house down.
Right.
So what is the limit here?
That's a great question. My thought is, I want to improve at the quarterback position. If I were the GM, there might be a move that I would make. But we also understand this is the Bengals we're talking about. So I could spend all my time being so frustrated that Andy Dalton's our quarterback when that's not going to change. Or I can say, all right, what's more realistic? What's the more realistic path? What can we surround him with to improve our team? I think the zealots, the ones that compare him constantly to the Mannings, Lucks, Brady's, that's just ridiculous. There's only a handful of those guys in the league ever, or at a time. You know what I mean? So most teams have to make do with, a lower caliber quarterback than those guys. So the Bengals are one of those teams. I would love for them to have drafted Luck. I would love for them to, had one of these guys that you can plug in at your quarterback position and just not worry about it for a while. But we're not there. And the Bengals also honor contracts. I don't know that they're going to make a big move. The known is less scary than the unknown. So, yeah, and the Jay Cutler comparison is spot on. But just, like the situation you have, he's going to be our guy for a while. So what else can we do to get better? It's kind of how I look at it. But, you're right. It's frustrating at times.
Well, and it's definitely one of the most difficult positions for a fan base to find themselves in. Like you said, when you've got a guy like Andrew Luck and you just happen to be at that draft position, that's magic. That's incredibly rare that works out so well. And when you've got a quarterback who's pretty good but has moments of just terrible, it's hard to justify replacing him. So now you've got this bizarre scenario where you've got to wait for a scenario in which another very competent quarterback would fall to the Bengals in the draft that is a guaranteed upgrade. And that's a very difficult thing to achieve, especially when you're winning enough games to draft in the bottom half of the pool. So it's a very hard thing to actualize to get that improvement unless there's somebody who shows up in free agency. And even then, now you've got to pay big money. It's one of the more frustrating positions to find yourself in, because there's no quick fix. There's no way that you can see a tangible improvement happening immediately. And even if there is, somebody in the fan base is going to be furious about it one way or the other.
Right. I mean, take your Colts, for example. They hit that lottery twice, had one bad season in the middle, to suffer for it. You make a good point. If there's a can't miss top prospect quarterback, which I don't know that we've had since Luck, unless I'm just missing someone.
Well, and even then, since, if you go before Luck, it's been a while since there's a guy where you can say there's no doubt. You got your Cam Newton and your Matt Stafford and Sam Bradford, quarterbacks being taken number 1 overall, but there was still a lot of doubt about those guys.
Right. Carson Palmer, he was one of those, no doubt. I mean, it didn't really work out, like it is for Luck, but you're right. That doesn't happen all the time. And then, making it to the playoffs puts you in the back half. You're not in a position to make those moves. So, it is extremely frustrating. I go back to my previous point. So what else can you do to make your team better? You can get a stronger running game. You can get a better line of, give them more time. You can have more options at the receiver position, build just an incredible defense, which is kind of the route the Bengals went. So, and that's where we're at. So I understand, and I suffer with a lot of the Bengals fans. I just don't waste all my breath bashing Dalton when there's really nothing's going to change that.
It's definitely a no-win situation. He's going to be the quarterback for the foreseeable future, because the question really comes down to who can you put in that is going to be better?
Right.
Especially with the money he's owed. If you're really going to say, all right, draft a guy in the second or third round and he's comparable and you're going to put him in, well, now you're paying a lot of money to a quarterback that a lot of fans are not ready to give up on to try out a guy. And that is almost never a good idea. So you've got to hope that he takes that next step and that, as you said, the scheme is maybe adjusted to allow him to find the success that he needs. Or maybe the personnel, which we've got to look forward now into the draft and say this team is very, very close. When you're making the playoffs so often, you've got to get this feeling you're close. You just need that extra little bit to get you over the hump. Cincy Jungle's Jason Markham wrote an article about draft needs, talked about a blocking tight end, a wide receiver, and the offensive line, and kind of lined it out there. Now, is this kind of the way you think that the team will be looking on offense? I mean, can you give us a little bit of insight into what you believe will be the draft strategy?
Yeah, on the offensive side of the ball, I think you nailed it. We need another / better option at wide receiver. I think we have, if everyone's healthy, I think the Bengals' talent, the depth of talent on this team rivals any team in the NFL. And you heard it a lot in the past few seasons about just the depth of the Bengals. But last year, injuries crushed us. A wide receiver was one of the positions where we were hurt. Marvin Jones, our no doubt number 2 receiver, lost him for the whole year. And we lost A.J. Green, who's just outstanding talent for several key games last season. So that the Bengals had more options and had guys healthy there. That's huge. So I think they will look to kind of boost that wide receiver position in the draft. We also got multi-Pro Bowl tackle in Andrew Whitworth, who's getting up in age, and eventually you got to look at who's going to fill in behind him. Andre Smith, who everyone remembers from his shirtless 40 dash, he's been a pretty solid lineman for the Bengals also, and he's getting older. So I think that those positions, the offensive line, the tackle position, wide receiver, and then another tight end to go with Tyler Eifert, who's had his own injury issues, is definitely what the Bengals will do. There's not necessarily like a need, like they have to reach for any of those positions, but I think they definitely will fill that on the offensive side of the ball in the draft.
Another thing Jason also did was he wrote a little bit on the defensive side as well. Linebacker, safety, and defensive line seem to be where they're trying to address things. Now, they've already went out and got Pat Sims, so they're trying to kind of see what's going to fit best, it seems like there. And he comes home from the Raiders after one season. Safety seems to be the biggest concern to me, as you guys, like you said, you have Burfict. You guys picked up A.J. Hawk. You still have Ray Malaluga, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you guys have a decent set at linebacker. I'm assuming Michael Johnson's going to play that defensive end / outside blitzing linebacker spot. Last time he played with you guys, he kind of rotated between those two spots. So, what is the biggest need out of those three that they need? And is it something where we might see them go after somebody like Landon Collins? Seems to be the name that Kyle and I love to throw out. But what specific people do you think they could kind of be after in the draft?
It's interesting. The Bengals have decent safeties. They have one guy that's pretty Ioka, who's he's a guy that has improved every year, and you're pretty excited to have back there. I although they like to pick first round corners, I can't foresee them looking at that at all after taking Kirkpatrick and Bernard in recent drafts. I struggle though, and I'm not one of those guys that's just all over the mock drafts and the players available. I kind of wait, let other guys fill those roles on the site, and then wait till it gets closer to the draft to see what's really shaking out. But I could see them going safety if someone falls. But it's also a pretty deep draft for the defensive tackle position, and the Bengals have a pretty good one in Geno Atkins, who was rehabbing last year. He played, but it was off an injury. It seemed like he lost a step. Hopefully that improves. But then they have Domata Peko, who's been around probably way too long. Great guy, but just not really. He makes his best plays 8 yards downfield. So if your defensive tackle's doing that, he's not doing something right. I think they could fill that position, and if they got someone, they could just kind of stop up the middle. In the AFC North, there's a lot of strong running teams, and so you get another body on that line. So I honestly think that's where we would probably look in the first round, unless one of these top linebacker safety guys falls. Unless someone falls in your lap, I think that they'll probably go with a big body up front, which is a pretty good strategy when you have no real glaring needs to a big guy up front on either side, offense or defense, is never a bad pick, I don't think.
Now we're getting to the point where we're about to run up against the clock, so let's kind of move it towards the end of this. Let's talk about next year. There's got to be some hope, having been to the playoffs as often as you have recently, but the schedule is brutal. I mean, Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, San Diego, St. Louis, Seattle, Houston. That's just at home. I mean, that is not an easy rotation. And on the away side, the easiest games are going to be Oakland and very possibly San Francisco. There's a lot of competition this year for this team. So what is the hope for next year? I mean, win-loss, how far are they going in the playoffs? That kind of stuff. I mean, where do you see this team going this next season?
All right. I mean, smart money's probably on a first round exit in the playoffs, right? But I think if the Bengals stay healthy and draft consistently like they have, I could see this team going farther than the past teams. The problems they're going to have, and I would argue their biggest problem last year was injuries. Just to kind of, tell a little story around it. I went to that Bengals-Colts game in Indy, and I'm going up with some buddies, and we're talking about, like, they can't lose again, right? And so we're kind of blinded by the homerism. And then we go to a bar right there in Indy called the Whistle Stop, order some beers, and these Colts fans start jawing at me. And they say, who do you guys have that we should be afraid of? And I'm thinking about it, and I'm like, crap, everyone is hurt. Like, the Bengals are going to lose this game. So I think if the Bengals stay healthy, this upcoming season, we have a much better shot of going farther. So I'm going to say the Bengals get over that hump, get a playoff win, at least one playoff win next year.
That's definitely, I'm going to say, optimistic. But you've got to have the hope. But I guess for me, I'm just looking at the opponents, and not that the games are not winnable, but just so much competition. I just fear a breakdown similar to like what we saw with the Cardinals last year, where there were so many tough teams towards the end of the year. Hopefully this team can make that playoff win, like you said, because now I'm kind of with you in that, oh no, you guys got to keep Marvin Lewis. I want to see that happen. We're very much up against the clock at this point, so now is the time. We're going to open the floor up to you. Anything you want us to know about, anything we didn't discuss, anything you want the fans' attention to be directed to, now is your time.
I mean, I'll just tell the guys, the listeners, to check out CincyJungle.com. We throw up, like you said, it's a great community. We throw up a ton of great content on the Bengals, touch on the rest of the NFL, but I mean, really, it's a Bengal stop. Every Wednesday, we do a live podcast. We stream it live, have a chat room open. People can check that out. It's called Inside the Jungle. Check it out on iTunes. But that's about it. I appreciate you guys for having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was excited to finally get somebody. I was worried for a bit because like I wasn't getting anybody to respond, and I was like, man, I don't think we're gonna get anybody for the Bengals. That's a bummer.
That is kind of par for the course for us, though. Everybody's like, who? For what? No.
Yeah, they're like, these two idiots, no thanks. No, we're good.
A few teams we had to Twitter shame to get them to come on. Like, oh, we were busy. Uh-huh.
That's pretty much what I did to you guys, too.
Yeah.
When I got you on. Thank you so much for coming on and taking a part. And, you know, I actually did listen to the podcast before I brought you on because I wanted to check it out myself. And it's obvious that you know your stuff. And that is one thing that we appreciate when we have guests on, is that they know every single thing we're talking about, because we don't always know what we're talking about. So thanks a lot for that.
Fairly often in my case.
I think if you say anything with conviction, you sound like you know what you're talking about. So that's what we try to do.
It's
be energetic and sound smart, right?
That's right.
Well, we're definitely going to have to have you back right around draft time. At least get that quick take reaction from you. If nothing else, get something off of Twitter or whatnot. But definitely appreciate you making the time.
Sure, we'll have to have you guys on sometime too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
We'd love that, by the way. Yeah, we would love to jump in. And Kyle has... he's Kyle, and I actually have, facts and opinions, but,
I have facts and opinions. They're just surrounded in a giant layer of horrible ideas and swearing.
Nice.
So, yeah, well, thank you so much, Mickey, and we'll be looking and we'll be in touch, all right?
Cool, guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Once again, everyone, that was Mickey Mentzer of CincyJungle.com, Bengals page extraordinaire, and apparently podcast, so... I'm going to be checking that out. There are too many podcasts for me to check out now.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like, whenever we have a guest, I try to listen to at least one of their episodes before we bring them on, just so I kind of get the feel for the guest. But yeah, he's a guy who really knows his stuff. He has a unique sense of humor, but I like the way that he kind of took his stab at fans of other teams and was like, yeah, all the other fans are obviously rational.
Yeah, well, that's just sports in general. Very, very interesting thing. Normally, there's just that straight up fact. Like, here is one thing this team has done, or one thing this team has not done. The thing I liked most talking to Mickey was he gave me that perspective the fans have of, here's what it is to be a Bengals fan when looking at the head coach and just knowing the fear of, is he going to get us further? If we get rid of him, will it get worse? And I had not been able to say that I've really gotten into a fan's head in quite that way during any of our interviews. So that was really cool. I very much feel like I've got a greater perspective for the Bengals fans.
Yeah, and that is a position that most people don't really consider, nor do fans talk about. I mean, you as a Colts fan have to kind of be thinking back to the time when Tony Dungy was like, I'm going, and the extreme just fear of what happens next after he was gone. And you also look back at Steelers fans when Bill Cowher decided that he was going to hang it up. The fans had to be in extreme fear of what's going to happen to us. Like, there's no way that we're going to be successful without these guys.
And definitely a tie-in with Andy Dalton. As we were talking about on the show, you can't replace your quarterback if you don't have anybody better. I mean, that's why Jay Cutler's still winding up under center in Chicago. That's why a lot of guys are still winding up under center. Geno Smith. But then again, he is more developed than Marcus Mariota.
Right, of course he is.
Of course, yeah. Well, the Jets owner said it, and he can't lie.
Oh, and he can't ever be wrong.
Well,
ever.
There's a rule, Ron,
or young,
where if you are more than 2 million rich, you are not allowed to lie.
Really?
No, God no.
Oh,
they do it all the time.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I was about to battle you in this because I was like, well, Aaron Hernandez has a lot of money and he's definitely lying right now.
He's keeping it real.
All right. Well, hey, for all those fans joining us from Cincy Jungle, thank you so much. Feel free to check out our show. FBIApodcast.com is our website. We're working on a new website as well, footballisamerica.com. You can also get us on email, fbiapodcast@gmail.com. You can also get us on Twitter at FBIA Podcast, Facebook.com/FootballIsAmerica Podcast. You can go to all those places to check us out. We appreciate you tuning in and being supportive of Mickey and, just joining us today. We appreciate all that.
We definitely hope to see you again for our show. We are available on iTunes, on Pocket Cast, on Stitcher, on a whole bunch of other things. So, hey, check us out. If nothing else, we can make your time at the gym better, or if you don't go to the gym, your drive better. We can make your life better. We will be the reason you get that new mortgage.
I don't think that's correct, but I think that's wrong. So thank you so much for joining us, and we're going to wrap this one up. Kyle, everybody, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again.